Good evening. I'm Dr. Richard Bitter, Rich Bitter actually, and I'm a severely overeducated person. Spent way too much of my life in school, but among my doctorates is a doctorate in the Constitution. I am the Schuyler County and Chemung County leader of the Divide New York movement. Brian is the Steuben County leader, and Alexandra, or Lexi, is the Livingston County leader. First, I want to talk to you about the Divide New York movement. If we were to draw a line from the top of Westchester and Rockland counties down, that occupies approximately, and these are round figures, 20% of the land area in New York. However, 65% of the population lives below that line. And the overwhelming majority of them, as you know, are in New York City and the immediate surrounding area. What that comes down to is our voices, for the most part, don't matter. We have very little say in what goes on in the state. There's a popular myth going around that our taxes support the city. At this point, that's absolutely not true. It hasn't been true for about 20 years. We get more money than we give. However, with the current city administration, I suspect that's likely to change shortly. That being said, a lot of the tax monies that we spend, and not just taxes, the monies that we have to spend to abide by the rules and the regulations that are foisted on us against our will, cost us unnecessarily large amounts of money. And we're stuck with rules that have no bearing on our lives, that are made by people who've never even been here. Little insignificant things like burn barrels. We're not allowed to have burn barrels anymore because a group of people in the city decided that global warming was going to end the human race. And, for us, it's not a big deal, but most of us pay to have our trash picked up. It's not included in our taxes. Minor points, but they add up. But the biggest point is we have no say in the state government. And this relates to all areas of our lives. There's bills pending right now, I believe, to change the driving age. That people will not be able to get their licenses anymore at 16. Well, I live 15 miles outside of town. And when my kids came of age, that took a huge burden off of me that they were able to drive themselves. Now, a bunch of people from New York City want to change that. And I suspect that if they go to 17, they'll someday want to go to 18, because that's the way it works. The more regulations, the more control that they can have over our lives, they're comfortable with. That being said, New York City is a wonderful place. If you want to go to a city, it's unique. It's a great place to go to. There's things you can do there that you can't do anywhere else in the world. And that's a nice thing. I choose not to go there very much. And I certainly choose not to live there. I have a nice little farm up in Schuyler County. I have no neighbors. I have a saying, if I can see you when you're on my side of the road, you're trespassing. And I like it like that. Our lives are so different from theirs that they have no business telling us what to do. What the Divide New York State movement seeks to do is divide New York State not into separate states. That will never happen. For a short time, I was part of the Divide California movement. They hired me as a consultant. And this is the oldest movement in the country. They've been doing this for over 50 years. And the reason it's never going to get anywhere is that to create a new state, you need congressional approval. Congress is never going to create more than one state out of New York, because guess what? Chuck Schumer and Kristen Gillibrand will not be our senators. We will be electing conservative senators, because based on the 2014 election, if you took New York State as a whole, upstate New York as a whole, it's at a minimum the third most conservative state in the country. Same goes for California. If California was divided into 3 states like they want to do, well, you'd have one state that could keep whoever their people are, but you'd get 4 conservatives added to the Senate. So it's not going to happen. So what Divide New York wants to do is, for federal purposes, we would be one state. We'd still be the state of New York. But for state governance purposes, we would be divided into 3 administrative districts. The first one, which would include Westchester, Rockland, and Suffolk counties, unfortunately divided by the city, is tentatively called Montauk. The other one would be New York City. They can keep the name. And what we've tentatively assigned to the rest of the state is New Amsterdam. So we would have separate state administrations for all state purposes. We would have a governor, but he would be the equivalent, I think one of these guys said it, of the Queen of England. He would be a figurehead to go do ceremonial garbage in Washington. And the state Senate and legislative districts would essentially stay the same, except that they would come together for our purposes and for the purposes in the areas that they live in. Areas, let's just say 1, 2, and 3. For purposes that would affect federal policy, they would have to come together as a group, to decide, distribution of federal disbursements of welfare money and all that kind of thing. So we would be one state with 3 separate administrations, and tentatively, this would have to all be worked out long term. The assets that lie within those regions would remain with those regions. So the offices, the state police, the DEC. DEC is a huge sticking point with me. I own a farm. And anybody that owns a farm knows that the DEC is a royal pain in the ass. And I say that as a doctor. But we would keep those assets that lie within our regions. And those assets would then become the DEC of New Amsterdam, the DEC of Montauk, and all the various state agencies. And the only time that the state agencies or the state legislature would come together would be for federal purposes. Other than that, we would be on our own. Cuomo can go and show us how to hold a shotgun like this. It's not even on his shoulder, and to convince us that he knows how to use a gun. The Second Amendment is a big one with me. I've spoken at S.C.O.P.E meetings in other counties before. The first thing I want to say is this, and I spoke to Doug about this. I hear a lot of people say, the big saying is, what part of shall not be infringed don't you understand? Well, let me tell you the part that most people don't understand. That phrase is not unique to the Second Amendment. It occurs 7 times. That or shall not be infringed. Similar phrases with the same meaning appear 7 times throughout the Constitution. But what that means is that the regulations controlling any rights have to be reasonable. First Amendment rights, you have a right to free speech, but you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. Everybody knows that one. Same thing goes for the Second Amendment. Reasonable regulations will and do exist. However, it's hard for me to understand how a place like New York City still operates with their gun laws in the light of 2 recent Supreme Court cases. And when we were talking Supreme Court cases, recent means within the last 20 years. But Heller and McDonald, I'm sure some of you are familiar with them, Heller out of Washington, D.C., McDonald out of Chicago, where the Supreme Court said, yes, the right to carry a gun, the right to own a gun is enshrined in the Second Amendment. Now, if we go down to New York City, they don't agree with that. I live in Schuyler County. I did a survey with the county clerk about 2 years ago, and of how many concealed carry permits exist in Schuyler County. And we came up with a number that approximately 57% of the adults in Schuyler County have concealed carry permits. More concealed carry permits exist in Schuyler County than exist in Manhattan. Schuyler County has a population of under 18,000. I think Manhattan's slightly higher than that. But the point is that now there's laws that are being proposed in the city. One of them that's big, I don't know, you all may have seen it. There's certain legislators from down there that want to make it that you can only buy 20 rounds a month. Now, we were talking about the trap shooting thing a second ago, Doug brought it up. How fast will an individual shooter go through 20 rounds? You know, that's like he'd go through a 2-year supply at one meeting. And I say all of this because it goes to the point that we're being regulated by people that have no understanding of our way of life. Most of them have never been north of the Bronx. And if you've ever been to the Bronx, it's slightly different than Bath. They have no conception and they don't want to know. So the Divide New York movement says that's fine. We get it. We're not going to make you accept our ways, but don't make us accept your ways. You live with the regulations you want to live with, and we'll live with the ones that we can live with. I was speaking to somebody a couple weeks ago and I said, you know, I'm a concealed carry permit holder. And if I want to go to Suffolk County where I can carry, I have two choices. I can leave my guns home. I can go through Connecticut and take the ferry over to avoid the city. Or I can go through the city, which means I have to stop, say, at the Franz Neck Bridge before I cross it, get out of my car, unload my pistol, lock it in the trunk, separate the ammo from the pistol, make sure it's all secured where I can't get to it, drive through the city. When I get past, you know, the Bronx or Brooklyn or Queens, I can get out of my car, reload my gun, and put it back on me. How absurd is this? You know? And honestly, like I said, I live in Schuyler County. I live 15 miles out of Watkins. I live in the middle of nowhere. I carry it home. Do I need my pistol there, or do I need it when I'm in the Bronx? But that's their business. If they're happy with that, our position is, God bless you. You guys are dying like flies anyway. You know, have at it. Our position is, don't tell us that we can only buy 20 rounds, that we can only carry 7 rounds in a magazine, that a gun, because it's black and scary, you can't own it. You know, realistically, your AR, which is, you know, banned through all this, how much more deadly is that than a Mini 14? None. It's essentially the same gun. My Mini 14 is set up for 500 yards. Well, of course, if a fly sneezes between me and the target, I'm going to miss, but you get my point. It's no different of a gun. It's the same gun, just it's not black and scary. So we don't want New York City anymore, or Andrew Cuomo, you know, telling us how we're supposed to live, because they live in an insular world, you know. You know, most of us, if we see a deer on the road, it's a nuisance, right? They see a deer on the road, they lock the brakes up, the kids get out, you know, it's a different world. And we don't want to be forced to live in their world. And it's bigger than just guns. It's bigger than burn barrels. They seek to control every aspect of our lives, as if we were living in a high-rise in Manhattan that has the population of Schuyler County living in that building and the building next door. You know, there's buildings there that multiple thousands of people live in. God bless them. I don't want any part of it, you know? Like I said, if you're on my side of the road and I can see you, you're trespassing. And I like it like that. So anyway, our thing is, what we're looking for people to join up with us with, you know, similar spirit. People who want to be involved, who want to speak to their state representatives. Now, our state representatives here, they're already on board with this. And, but there's a lot that aren't. There is one problem, and I don't know how we're going to get there, and I will address it, is how do we get there? In New York State, we don't have the rights of referendum or recall. No recall. Okay? But we don't have the right to referendum. We don't have the right to petition to have a law enacted or changed other than approaching our legislatures or writing them legislators or writing them letters or that kind of thing. Most other states have the ability for the people to get enough signatures on petitions, something goes on the ballot. We can go every 20 years, 20 years. Not trying to pick on anybody, myself included. Most of us in this room are going to be dead in 20 years. So we have no right. The right doesn't exist. And then the right is subjected again to the city, because we have to vote on whether we're going to have a convention to address the flaws in the laws. That was good. I like that.
And that just took place last year.
And that took place and we got shot down. Now, I forget what the numbers were exactly, but the anti-constitutional convention people, if I'm not mistaken, spent $3.7 million. You may have better numbers. But it was up there. And our side had less than $1 million, significantly less than $1 million. We got our asses kicked. Excuse me, kids. I'm sorry. You know, we got thumped big time. As an attorney, my argument is that we have lost the right to seek redress. We've lost our rights to petition anything. And I would make the argument, I'm not going to get hyper-technical, that some of those rights are enshrined in the Constitution. And that to bring that up in front of a court would be one hell of a legal battle. Because the power brokers in Albany and in the city would spend unbelievable amounts of money to defeat that. But we have to get there. And to get there is going to take membership, numbers, and money. I'm not asking you for money, I don't do that kind of thing. But we do need members. And the rights that we're fighting for are the rights of upstate New York and the rights of the people out in Suffolk County. The people in Suffolk County are, if you've ever been down there, it gets real rural out at the eastern end of Long Island. It gets unbelievably rural. But they're stuck because there's only one way out. And it's through the city, and we can't help that. And that's why originally we were a two region movement. We had to make it 3 because the people down there are dying too. Our president, John Bergener, is actually in Suffolk County right now as I'm speaking to a group down there on the same issues. But that's what the Divide New York movement is about. It's about recapturing our rights. I did a video, I was asked to do a video by 2 TV producers 4 or 5 years ago. And my point is that, we have surrendered rights an inch at a time. And now we're a mile past the goalpost. We have lost so many rights in New York. The state is so oppressive and people are fleeing. Schuyler County is now below 18,000 in population. And it's like 17.9, I think. And it was 19,000 a decade ago. Just a hair under 19,000. But that's the condition all over the state. People are fleeing. And the power brokers are still spending money as if the same tax base exists. Which means that they're going to be looking for new, they won't say taxes, but they'll impose regulations that'll backdoor the fees. And we're all going to pay, and we are paying. So our group is we don't need that. Initially, realistically, it's going to be a hit for us because we're not going to be getting the money that came up here. But given a couple of years of equalization, when we start disposing of the unnecessary regulations and some of the unnecessary taxes, we're going to come out ahead. And we're going to come out a lot more comfortable, because we'll be able to live lives like we were supposed to live. When I'm not from here originally, my accent sometimes gives me away. But I've been here for 30 years, and I'm here by choice. And the things that I was able to do when I moved here, many of them I'm not able to do now. It's absurd what's going on in this state. And again, to reiterate, our lives are being controlled by people who have no concept of how we live. They have no concept that a lot of people hunt deer to have enough meat to get through the year. You know, their idea is, you know, they go hunting at, you know, whatever grocery store they got down there. You know, they think that everybody hunts for recreation. And they want to limit how many rounds, again, you can buy to go hunting. Well, on a bad day, a hunter can go through his 20-round monthly allocation if that were to pass. I don't think that's going to pass, but you guys can address that in a minute. But that's the absurdity that goes on down there. And now, you know, they want to limit the types of guns we can own even further. In praise of all New Yorkers, and I'm not asking for a show of hands, the state police estimate that about 3% of the assault rifle owners did the SAFE Act thing and registered them. And, you know, thank you. No hands. I always tell people, if I had one, I would have registered it, because that's the law. But at any rate, that's what we're about. We're about dividing New York into 3 administrative regions, which would free us up then to control ourselves and not to be controlled by a bunch of people with a completely different agenda. And did I miss anything? All right, so did I go 15 minutes yet?
I was enjoying it.
Well, does anybody have any questions for me?
Well, one thing I might want to bring up is it won't affect anybody's state retirement whatsoever. And I think that should be brought up, because a lot of people are immediately like, oh, well, that might screw up my retirement. Or, oh, my wife's a teacher. Oh, I'm gonna, you know, lose my retirement. It won't affect anybody's retirement that works for the state or a county or was in the state retirement system. They will keep their same state retirement.
That was a huge talking point from the anti-constitutional convention side. They had union leaders from Albany, Schenectady, and the city coming out and saying they're gonna strip all you people, anybody who works for any state agency, of your pensions. Absolutely a fallacy, but that was one of their biggest talking points. Like I said, we get what's ours. What's ours is already ours, you know? They get what's theirs. And the way they're going down there, you know, pretty soon they're gonna be sucking us dry, because you can't sustain the level, frankly, the level of welfare of all various forms. I'm not just talking about cash allotments, but the level of welfare that's occurring, you know, and growing. The entitlements are growing, and I can't afford them. I know I'm not entitled to anything. You know, I have to work for a living, just like everybody else does. Any questions? Yes, sir.
So you reference what's ours and what's theirs. Infrastructure and school system, is that divided, or is that like SUNY and CUNY?
SUNY would be divided,
Yes.
within each region.
Or
New York
public
City, all the
schools.
schools that are SUNY in New York City would become New York City SUNY. Everything upstate would be like New Amsterdam SUNY, and we would keep all those funds.
Yeah.
Go back to the federal FAFSA at that point.
Like I said, you know,
Infrastructure cost economically to rebuild bridges and things.
we would have to be responsible for our roads, our bridges, our infrastructure, state police, all of that. Like I said early on, what is here stays here, and what's there stays there.
Our school systems are not totally paid for on a local level,
No, they're not.
not even close.
No, but we would still have the same basic overarching structure, but instead of it going to a pool with the other 2 regions, our upstate money would stay upstate, and then it would be dispersed, you know, proportionally. And by the way, you know, Common Core and all that nonsense, you know, have a nice day. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
What about issues of commerce? Products produced up here, let's say, dairy products or meats and fruits and vegetables being shipped downstate. Is that gonna affect any kind of, them taxing those products going downstate?
Well, I can and can't answer that. New York State's gonna have to get its milk from somewhere. So they can tax it all they want, but if they tax it out of existence, you know, it's gonna be, that's probably not likely to change much, because this products will be produced here, but we're still free to market them, you know, in the same manner they are now.
Where would the overall governor come from? We would elect our own governor here, correct?
Well, we would elect, I prefer to refer to him as an administrator.
Okay.
But yeah, we would have our own administrator, and each separate area would have their own administrator. I'm not here if that's right. But the governor, the ceremonial governor, would be, elected like he is now in a general election, but his authority would be, like the Queen of England, limited to, walking around with his little hat on and holding his staff, and getting his brother to threaten people.
What kind of reaction is it like in Albany and that area?
These legislators would be more equipped to answer
What
that.
kind of what?
What kind of reaction is it?
Oh, depends on where you're from.
No, I mean like those people up there in Albany area.
The Albany bureaucracy would fight this tooth and nail, absolutely. Without a doubt, they would do that.
They
And,
wanna keep us?
They love us.
yeah, they love to tell us what to do.
Use us.
And they do it to themselves too, it's amazing. One of the things that's always boggled my mind in the state legislatures, we've got a lot of New York City legislators, that are state senators, state assembly people. And most of them wanna be New York City council members. They get paid more in New York City Council. They have more pork to distribute in New York City Council. So they're kind of jealous of them. So they're even passing things in Albany that New York City government could do themselves if they wanted to. Just to give you one absurd example, one year, I actually got up and debated on this bill because it just was so absurd. We were passing legislation in Albany to tell the New York City Parks Department how to do a study on where they should place garbage cans and recyclable things. And I'm like, why are we doing this? When New York City could do this on their own if they felt it was important enough. And little things like that get done all the time, from the New York City legislators in Albany to those in New York. And then, they get term limits in New York City, they go through their term limits, and then they'll run to go to Albany for a few years. And then some of them go back and run for council again.
Do you think that they're doing like the park thing for funding? So the funding has to come from Albany instead of coming out of New York City coffers?
No, there was no funding attached to that one.
What is a study, right?
Yeah.
Somebody's gotta pay for a
Yeah.
study.
Yeah, well, they were requiring the New York City government to do it.
Oh, okay.
So,
Just real quick on the question, you said, do they really want us? There are some that said, hey, we'd be better off without you, but there are some that really think of us, almost like their backyard. I'll give you an example. I remember the big fracking debate. I was a staffer for Senator Winter back in 2008, 2009, and I went to there was a forum going on about the fracking issue. And it was made clear, listen, there was never gonna be fracking in New York City or in the New York City watershed. Upstate areas wanted it because of the land, because of the opportunity. And there was someone who really had the audacity to say, we can't frack in upstate New York. Upstate New York is New York City's backyard. That was their opinion, that we were their backyard. And I looked at this person next to me, I think it was a reporter, I go, excuse me, did that guy just say that upstate New York is New York City's backyard? How arrogant and pompous is that? That's some of the mentality you face with this issue. So there are a number of people that like to keep, and as Dr. Bitter was saying, Governor Cuomo would be the governor, but he wouldn't be able to say what he did in his PowerPoint presentation during the State of the State/budget presentation in big capital letters on his presentation. It says, we are in control. And that was made perfectly clear this past legislative session. And if that's gonna wake up to everyone that elections have consequences, and I was gonna go through some of the things that we passed this year, which is became law, that really I think is spurring this discussion even further. I can list a couple of them just right now. I really think these are the things that really kind of help spur this debate. It started out with the expansion of abortion in the legislation we passed, the crazy so-called criminal justice reform bills that were passed, no bail. Think about it, a drug dealer comes down from New York City here to Bath to sell drugs. Now, instead of arresting and bringing them here and holding them for bail, they get issued an appearance ticket, show back up for court next month. Like, you're ever gonna see that drug dealer from New York City or Rochester ever again? No, they're gonna send the next person down, the next person down. And the discovery laws, these things are gonna be very challenging for our district attorneys, our sheriffs. I mean, they're very scared about where this is going, so that's some of those. We already talked about more Second Amendment challenges, bills that are challenging the Second Amendment, the rights of law-abiding citizens. A climate bill that we passed this year to make, do our own Green New Deal in New York. I won't get into the specifics of it, but that bill is gonna be very costly to everybody. I mean, some estimates say it's gonna cost $8.9 billion annually to comply with these new regulations. To think that we can go 100% carbon-free by 2050, I mean, that carbon-free, and so would you not be able to use a propane gas tank, or a lawnmower, gas lawnmower, or gas cars, or airports? I mean, where does all this stop? I mean, then the farm labor bill we passed this year, which is gonna be devastating to the family farmer. You know, this is gonna be devastating to the family farmer in New York State. And at the same time, during a debate, one of my colleagues from New York City got up and said, well, I'd gladly pay more for a gallon of milk. Well, it doesn't work that way. Farmers not seeing that money. It doesn't work that way. It's just, that's just the naive. Then of course you got the DREAM Act, which is free tuition for illegal immigrants or undocumented, whatever you want to refer to them, or the driver's license for illegal immigrants, or however you want to refer to them. And then obviously you saw at the end the governor trying to put his own proposal in place, the license plate tax and replacement bill. Now, fortunately, that was defeated. And what I said when that happened, I think we all kind of said, I think that was defeated because of all of you. The public spoke out in one voice. And what I've said over and over again is, I think this really said that when we speak together in one voice and come together in one voice, we can make change happen and stop change from happening. And I think that should be a powerful message for all of us. We can stop things if we speak together and work together. So those are just some of the things. But ladies and gentlemen, this group is emboldened after what happened in this legislative session. We have people in the state senate who are self-proclaimed proud socialists, democratic socialists of America, I think they're, I mean, socialists out of the AOC mold. I spoke to a group. The Democratic Party of today is not the Democratic Party of my parents and my grandparents, or even the Democratic Party of even upstate New York. It's right now the Democratic Party of New York State is a really extreme far left AOC mold that is just taking away liberties and thinking you should be funding every proposal they think they need to do. I mean, those are the things. But just some of the other legislation looking to do. We all know they want to legalize marijuana. They want to legalize the sex trade in New York State. They want to open heroin injection sites in New York State. They want to increase the minimum wage for inmates, while at the same time they're making it more difficult for our corrections officers to work inside our prisons. Taking away tools by closing prisons to make them safer, so you have more double bunking and and more crowded in the existing prisons. Or taking away tools so our corrections officers can be safe. I mean, they're trying one thing after another. I mean, even, you know, Mr. Griffin's the coach of the track team, which we're selling those tickets for. There's legislation that would basically stop high school track teams from operating. There's legislation that would stop, you see fire departments and other groups do gun raffles to help support not-for-profits, and there's legislation that would stop that from happening. I mean, it's just ridiculous. I mean, those are some of the things that we're seeing now, and I think these types of proposals, what we saw this legislative session, has really spurred this movement even further. I mean, because this, like Dr. Bear said, this legislation stems back, I mean, back in the 80s, I remember Senator Randy Poole and Assemblyman Don Davidson from the area, they were the main sponsors of the bill, and that's kind of progressed over the years. And listen, there are differences, and we have to do our part to try to educate. I tried to do that. I brought New York City Assembly Democrats up here. We took them to a gun range, let them fire the firearm, let them see, you know, ask questions, what made a gun legal versus illegal, and they were asking the question after they got done with that. I remember them saying, well, that doesn't make any sense. And we go, that's what we've been trying to tell you. So they get out there and they handle the firearm, going to a dairy farm, going to a vineyard, seeing the different things. But it hasn't just been them coming upstate. We bring some Republicans down to the city to see their challenges and opportunities in the city, but we need to do more of that. It's been helpful in some regards, but it hasn't been helpful enough, ladies and gentlemen. We have to do more, and I think that's where I think this movement is coming around. And you know, when I read the mission statement and the vision, and I don't want to read the whole thing. You probably already read it, but I think I'll read the first sentence and the back sentence about this. So it really kind of stood out to me. It says, "We understand the obstacles ahead of us are numerous and challenging." And then they go down to the bottom. It's time to recognize that New York City and upstate New York are too different to be ignored by the same exact set of laws. The people of upstate need a voice in their government. They need and want liberty, and this is now the only way forward. So I just think that kind of just sets the agenda of what's trying to be done with this. It is gonna be a challenge, no question about it. There are gonna be some obstacles, there are gonna be some legal challenges for sure. And the Attorney General, has already came out with an opinion saying she's opposed to it, so that's not a surprise, but that's what we're facing. This is not gonna be an easy thing for any stretch, politically and even legally, and even with the system, it's not gonna be an easy thing, especially when you get into things like debt. Debt, how you're gonna divide up the debt, you have just I think it's like around $56 billion in debt in the state, that's just the debt that's on the books. We're not even talking about off the book debt, the backdoor borrowing through our throughways and authorities and commissions. How that's gonna work, debt issuance is gonna be a big challenge, so those are just some of the things that are gonna need to be addressed through this, but you don't get there without having a discussion, so that's why I think I applaud our leaders who are going around and having these education forums, getting out there. If you don't go out there and present it, and have a discussion, and talk to people about it, at the very least, get the message out there that what's going on now is not working. We're not gonna accept it, we can't keep accepting it the way it is, we have to make change happen, so we have to speak out, and we have to demand change, and we have to make our voices heard, so I think this is what this movement is about. I think that's why, Senator Mayor, Marge, and myself, are all supporting this bill, because we think change needs to happen, and we need to make sure that there's a voice in this discussion.
And it also, while you good people are here probably mostly from S.C.O.P.E tonight, or can care about Second Amendment rights, it's not just about people who care about their Second Amendment rights who are showing up in great numbers like you are tonight to talk about it and to learn. I'm hearing that in Buffalo and all across upstate New York, church groups, conservative organizations that are holding meetings to talk about the same issues are also having overwhelming number of people who years ago stayed home, they were happy living their life, just working hard, paying their taxes, leave me alone. But now that they see how drastically the state is turning and how this is no longer some issue on the back burner, now they're also stepping out and know that something has got to change, or our entire way of life is going to change. And so they're stepping up to the plate. And I really do see, while I agree with everybody that this is a huge undertaking, and who knows the ultimate success, whether or not it'll be successful or not, but it has spurred a grassroots movement of people who care about their way of life, who care about retaining it, and in that respect, it's heartwarming to see people now step up to the plate and become active. Like years ago, the Tea Party movement came out of nowhere, and all of a sudden went to Washington. Yes, and they affected change, and I think that it can happen. Again, will it be easy? Is it any guarantee? No, but this is how you start.
If I may, based on what was said here, two minor points and one major. Minor point is that if my farm is somebody in the city's backyard, they're really in arrears on their taxes. The other is, and the fracking issue is huge with a lot of us who see through the made-for-TV movies about fracking. The ban on fracking cost me, in real money, more than $500,000. Real money. And I'm sure in this room there's some landowners who have serious pieces of land who may have cost even more than that. And the other point is that, and this goes to what you both were saying, in New York State, the sheer number of legal gun owners could change everything if they voted. Apathy is pitiful. It's pitiful in this state. The number of legal gun owners could have prevented all of this. Cuomo would not be our governor. Shudder to think who might be, but it wouldn't be Andy.
Rob Astorino will be governor right now if gun owners got out the vote.
Who would go?
Rob Astorino will be governor right now. In 2014, gun owners got out the vote. And let that be another thing I say often this year. When people say, how does this all happen? 3 words: elections have consequences. So if you participate, it can affect change, but if you don't participate, you're watching change go right by you, not the kind of change you want. Elections have consequences, ladies and gentlemen.
And a lot of people would tell you, and they're right, if you're not getting out there and voting, then shut up.
Exactly, right.
You got nothing to say, because you're part of the problem. So, what this group S.C.O.P.E is about, the people who gravitate towards this group could affect the change. Single-handedly, in the state of New York. Does anybody else have any questions? Yes, sir.
So, in order to get to that ultimate position where the people in this room probably wanna see us be at, what are the steps necessary and required to get there?
That's a complex question. First of all, we need numbers. Because numbers alone put the fear of death in a lot of politicians. The way the laws are now, as I spoke of earlier, we got 18 years until we can, as a people, do anything. And, you know, unless something changes drastically, that's not gonna happen then either. So, you know, speaking as somebody educated in the law, it's gonna take a lot of money, but somebody needs to fund a legal action, federal legal action to change our system as being unconstitutional. Because we have no ability. You know, they say we have the right to vote, but do we? You know, this is a two-edged sword, cutting both ways against us. We have the right to vote, but 65% of the voters live 250 miles plus from us. And they overwhelm us in sheer numbers. And they vote more consistently than we do. I don't mean in the numbers of people that vote, but in how they vote.
So, because you mentioned the voting aspect, all right, so you throw into the equation, last time I checked, any felons were, basically gave up their vote the right, or I'm sorry, right to vote. That goes back many years, they lost that.
That varies by state, and that's not true in New York. A convicted felon, while they're in custody, which means either prison or parole, cannot vote. I know plenty of felons on parole who vote.
Okay.
It's the nature of the business.
So then, the other part of that question is,
The governor started pardoning them.
Well, that's what
To be
he's
able to-
doing
to be
now,
able to
but-
vote on parole, just a couple of years ago. So, individuals on parole, I don't know what criteria the governor uses, but they do a list, every month or so, and if you're on parole, he pardons you to give you the right to vote.
The new voting block.
Well, it's not a conservative voting bloc.
how is that legal in any stretch and not considered some form of collusion?
Well, it is legal, under our state constitution, for the governor to have done that without the legislature. That's the way it was written in the Constitution. So it's unfortunate. I don't like it. None of us like it. We oppose it. We made a hell of a lot of noise about it. And we get a list every month of all those parolees that were granted the right to vote, that now have lost that privilege once again because they've broken their parole. And it's in the hundreds every month when the report comes out. It's crazy. It's just like the legislature passing legislation to the green light, so-called green light, to give illegal aliens driver's licenses.
Which the next obvious step is voter rights
Yeah,
step.
yeah. So you have some license, you can register to vote. Just because it says not for federal purposes on it isn't going to prevent that. It's going to make it even harder to catch voter fraud that goes on, and easier for them to register.
And New York City is moving to make it legal for everyone to vote there. Irrespective, you don't have to show anything, show up at the polls essentially.
A state bus trip.
Well, you know, wouldn't it be sweet if we all took a bus trip?
Right, that's what
How does that not violate federal?
It's not a federal law.
It's not in federal elections either.
You mean in federal election, you don't have to be a citizen to vote?
Well, you have to be a citizen registered to vote, yes, registered to vote, I thought you were talking about the parolees.
No, but I mean, as far as this whole voting thing,
Well, yeah, but state elections and federal elections have different laws and rules that follow them,
so
so.
if you vote in a state election, who's gonna stop you? You're gonna be in that book. They don't ask me.
Well, exactly.
Well, and therein lies the problem, is that when you go into the polling place, there's a list of people you're voting for, and there's no line that says you have to stop here.
Yeah.
You know, so what are they depending on? You know, your honesty, you multiple convicted felon who's now voting, and they're depending on your honesty. And I don't mean to pick on felons, I know plenty of felons who are doing very well and severely rehabilitated, but, you know, as a rule of thumb, you know, we don't need this. And these are the people, they're gonna be taking over the city, non-citizens, everybody else, and then they're gonna be electing all these state representatives, who are then gonna be telling us again what to do, and probably costing me another $500,000 I don't have.
Now, you gotta wonder, you gotta think about it, say, why do these New York City liberal legislators, why are they kowtowing so much to illegal immigrants? You know, we're looking at the loss of population in New York State as a whole. Our loss as a whole would be immensely greater if it wasn't for the influx of immigrants into the metropolitan New York City area. That part is growing, we're dwindling, the other part is growing. They wanna get them included as much as possible, to bolster, themselves.
And to get federal money.
And federal money, yeah.
So let's bring them to their knees, stop taking their garbage.
We should,
Absolutely.
we should.
There's over
No,
100 trucks a day going down that
Well,
interstate.
no, the trucks are outrageous, but there are communities that host these landfills that are making money on them.
Are they still trucking them up to Seneca
Yeah,
Meadows?
they're still trucking to Seneca Meadows. You know, fortunately, we were able to stop that incinerator along the east side of Seneca Lake. They were gonna use train to get that garbage there, but still, you know, you're worried about emissions and climate change, yet you spend all these carbon resources trucking this garbage from the city upstate. If these my argument was if this incinerator is so good for our environment, that it's gonna be okay in the middle of Finger Lakes wine country, then locate it in Rockland County, in Orange County, in Westchester County, and only truck your garbage that far.
Have Con Ed convert
Yeah,
to trash incineration.
yeah. They don't want it in their backyard. We're their backyard. We're far enough in the back 40. We're far enough in the back 40, they're willing to send it up
Your
here.
generators should be right along the coast of New York City.
Well, what's interesting with that is they wanna truck their garbage up here, but going back to the burn barrel thing, then they wanna tell me what I can and can't do with my garbage.
Yep.
I gotta take theirs.
So, I mean, we're seeing right now, with last November, we lost the majority as Republicans and Conservatives in the state Senate. We were grasping on by one vote, and that was with a Democrat from New York City who happened to sit with us, who comes from a conservative Jewish district. And he was with us like-minded on a lot of our fundamental rights aspects of things. And he was a fine member. That's the only reason we held on to a majority for 4 years, in the last 4 years. Now, we've lost that by 8 votes. And we're gonna fight like hell to win those seats back next November in 2020. It's a long shot. But if we don't win a majority back then, in 2022, all the districts are redrawn by those that are in control. And that will be drawn by Democrats from New York City that will obliterate our ability to ever come close to getting a majority back in New York City.
And it'll create Democratic pockets here, like Ithaca.
Yeah, it will, yeah. I'm the lucky Republican to represent Ithaca, and, you know, I say that as a joke, but, I do appreciate Ithaca. I have nothing against Ithaca. They just don't think the same way as, I do. We get along well. I help them through the bureaucratic morass of everything else, but we don't agree fundamentally on political philosophies, I can tell you that much.
What do they call it, what, 5 square miles surrounded by sanity?
Surrounded by reality.
By reality.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting, the politics of what's going on too in the Democratic Party. Like I said, the Democratic Party of today isn't the Democratic Party of like our parents and our grandparents. You have this AOC wing is really liberal, progressive. I don't think liberal, progressive. I mean, they're out there like Pluto. I mean, they're way out there. They're primarying. They're going after their own. Like AOC took out Congressman Crawley, who was probably one of the next in line to be this next speaker if that would ever happen. They're going after established Democrats who passed all these bills that I talked about. Joe Lentoff, chairman of the Codes Committee, who ushered through these terrible criminal justice bills and was proud of it. He's getting primary because he's not liberal or progressive enough. There's a whole host of these primaries going on, and they want to get more of their own people in there, more of these socialists in there to keep shaping government the way they want it to be shaped, not the way we want it to be shaped. And that's what we're seeing. But they're going after their own, believe me.
There's a huge group of Democrats in the Assembly that think Cuomo isn't liberal enough. Really? Yes, yes, they believe he's not far enough. It is.
Doug was up first.
Oh, that's okay.
I think there's a lot of like-minded people in this room. We all agree that something really needs to be changed. But all of us, I think, need direction on what should we be doing? How can we help, other than that full court press in the next two and a half years? We live upstate. How are we going to change the assembly person or the senator down in these more liberal areas? What can we do up here at this point? How can we mobilize other than simply be a number?
Being a number is a big thing, and don't discount that. You know, I believe, like with the license plate thing, Cuomo watches the polls. And if we were big enough in number, you know, right now, the Divide New York movement, even though we are many tens of thousands in number, we're a byword. You know, we're a joke there. There's meetings all the time. On Saturday, anybody who I haven't bored enough yet, on Saturday, Captain Morgan's in Corning. What time?
6:30.
6:30, thank you. There's a Divide New York movement. There's regional meetings all the time. There's paperwork that I left out front. There's 2 forms. They have our web address, and my cards are out there. It's got my phone number on it. Call me if you want to. I don't mind taking calls if I can take them. If I tell you I'll get back to you, trust me, I will. I don't ignore phone calls. But we need numbers, first of all, to start getting noticed. And then that has a snowball effect. Because once we get numbers, then we can afford, you know, I hate to bring up money, but it's a reality. To fund all these things costs money. To fund the litigation that all this is gonna generate is gonna take money. We have no problem coming up with attorneys, you know, but, you know, the work I do I don't charge anything for the work I do for Divide New York, but if I had to spend the next 3 months in federal court in Utica, you know, people have to eat, you know, we all have bills to pay too, you know. So, but it's the numbers, but 6:30, Captain Morgan's, named after a rum?
Name is privateer.
We have the right in upstate New York to drink rum.
Well, you know, we've got some momentum going right now, you know, with as demoralizing as it has been to go through losing the majority in the Senate and being in the minority. Frankly, our biggest ammunition is coming from the Democrats themselves right now. You know, all the stuff we warned about, and for groups like this, the New York Senate was never conservative enough. You're not blocking this, you allowed the SAFE Act, you did this, you didn't do that. Now you're seeing exactly how much the Republican Senate held up in the state for a long time with this plethora of things that rolled through in the first 6 months of their majority in this thing. So they're giving us the ammunition that we need to work in these marginal districts. You know, they picked up 6 seats on Long Island. Those aren't hugely liberal districts. They're more Democrat than they are Republican, but they're not way liberal and socialist the way this movement is going. You know, we had long-serving Democrat senators who I had relationships with over the years, that got beat in primaries last year by these young upcoming socialists, AOC wannabes. We probably have half a dozen of them in the state legislature now that are young, have no experience, have no life knowledge whatsoever, and they believe in socialism, and they're outspoken about it. It's scary. So we need to use what they're doing against them. But as you say, from here, we're all like-minded, and you know, we're not spouting that nonsense here as your elected officials. How do you help out in a district in the Lower Hudson Valley? How do you help out in a district on Long Island? We need to find ways to do that, whether it's volunteering and going down and knocking on doors, because let me tell you, they send busloads of people out of New York City to Long Island and Westchester districts to go knock on doors. We don't do that effectively enough on our side.
I mean, I think if there's a proposal out there that, in my opinion, should galvanize people to get behind, even Democrats and Republicans and independents, whether upstate or even downstate, quite frankly. There's a legislation that was signed into law that was created, a public campaign finance commission. They've been meeting, and what they're gonna do, they met on, I think it was Columbus Day, on a holiday, to take testimony. They're gonna release their recommendations like the day before Thanksgiving, so no public input or feedback. And why does that matter? Because if the way it was set up, this commission, they had to present it to the legislature by December 1st. If the legislature does not act, what they propose becomes law. What they wanna do, basically, is just take your tax dollars and make you spend your tax dollars on candidates that you don't agree with. It would be a 6-to-1 match. They want to use the New York City model to do this. So think about it. For every dollar I would, let's say if I was in the system, every dollar I would raise, I would be able to get $6 of your taxpayer dollars to fund my campaign. But maybe the worst part about this is that your dollars are going to fund campaigns of people you don't agree with. So can you imagine you're helping us pay for yard signs and TV advertising and mail of people you disagree with vehemently on politics and policy and ideology and for whatever it may be. So now, right now, it's a voluntary system. If you want to donate to someone's campaign, you can. It's voluntary. But after this, it's not voluntary anymore. Your tax dollars are going to pay for campaigns. They say it's $100 million. Nonsense. It's going to be a lot more than $100 million. It's going to be $200 million plus a year once this thing is fully implemented. And think about $200 million. Wouldn't you rather have that money go to fix your roads and bridges, maybe for your education, or God forbid, here's an outline deal, give it back to you, the taxpayer, you know? But that's what we're looking at. This is the type of proposal that should galvanize people. Because I can't understand why we want taxpayer-funded campaigns. It's not gonna get they think it's gonna get the corruption out of politics. So we're gonna go to New York City's model. They're the bastion for non-corruption. Give me a break. That's what we're gonna implement across the state. So that's what we're facing. So that's something that should galvanize people across the state. We should be doing op-eds and people all across the state. We should be, if we're part of groups, I don't care if it's a union, S.C.O.P.E group, our groups should be networking across the state. But to use taxpayer funds to fund campaigns of people you vehemently or disagree with on policy or ideology is really it's terrible, in my opinion. It shouldn't be happening. It's just really, really frustrating.
Any other questions?
The whole referendum thing you were talking about, that's a state constitution.
Yeah, we don't have a referendum process in New York State. I think we should have some form of referendum process, but I don't want a referendum process like California has, where there's over 100 referendums on the ballot in any given year. That's just absurd. Finding the right way to come up with something that would allow referendum, you know, other than the Constitutional Convention that comes around every 20 years, which was voted down last time. You know, there's no process for that. The only ways to change the Constitution, like we're talking about here, would be to pass a constitutional amendment through the legislature. We would have to go through 2 successive legislatures, and then it has to go to a public vote then, after that second vote by the second legislature. So theoretically, in a perfect world, we could pass it this next year, in 2020. Then there'd be another election, so there's a new legislature in 2021. They could pass it again in 2021, and it could technically be on the ballot November of 2021. You know, that's, you know, this undertaking, it's akin in my mind to climbing Mount Everest. I mean, it is very difficult with the votes, with the balance, with the way the votes are. Litigation that's being talked about, I have no idea what the odds of success are with that. Dr. Bitters probably has a better handle on it than I do. That's out of my bailiwick. But other than that, wait for the next constitutional convention to come around, which will be in another 19 years.
And I can tell you who in this room will be here for that.
Yeah, yeah. People will forget about it. And you know, how much worse state are we gonna be in 20 years? I mean, we can't sustain these losses of people for much longer.
You know, and I talked to, even with the Constitutional Convention, our leader, Brian Cole, was a big advocate for it. And a lot of people were opposed to it, unions were opposed. I mean, I talked to gun owners who were opposed to it. Why were they opposed? Why were you opposed? And some of the feedback I heard is, I'm afraid what this group might go in and actually change the Constitution the way I don't want it to be changed. And then it gets voted by New York City when you promote it this way. They're afraid that it was gonna take more rights away from law-abiding gun citizens. That was one of the biggest fears being talked about. So that's what we're
It
facing.
could be detrimental actions, and the public employees unions are scared to death of it because it could impact their retirement rights.
There's a lot of fake reports put out on all that stuff.
There was a mountain of disinformation put out to defeat the convention. I personally think that litigation is gonna be the only way to go, but you could back me up on this. Any litigation of this nature is gonna be 5 or 10 years in the court system, easily.
We need to come up with a way for downstate not to want us anymore. I mean,
And making
to get them to go
faces-
along with this, I don't know how else you get them to go along with it. You know, you talk about the fiscal losses, because the last numbers I really had, and I don't have a firm handle on it, I say it's somewhere about $6 billion of a net flow of revenues from New York City throughout the rest of upstate New York. So it'd be a huge loss. Now, we could change the laws and allow natural gas exploration. A huge industry that wouldn't take any economic incentives to come in and do it. You know, the governor runs around throwing billions of dollars around to encourage people to come here. There's a huge industry that would come here just to be able to do business here, regardless of how onerous the playing field might be.
And now the governor is blocking gas
Oh,
pipelines.
yeah, don't get me going to that.
You know, I don't want, we don't wanna get into that, but I'd like to know how Con Ed, and they're shutting down Indian Point.
Yeah.
They're shutting down Indian Point, which generates a phenomenal amount of nuclear generated electricity for that area. They don't have the infrastructure to bring the gas in to run plants, so what's the alternative? There's only one I can think of, and that's coal. And they're not gonna do that either.
There's three pipeline projects that the administration has shut down through DC. I think it's the Northern Access that goes up through like the Buffalo area, National Fuel is putting in Constitutional Pipeline, which it goes up into like the Westchester area where Con Ed is. And the other one that's getting a lot of attention is the one in National Grid, they call it Northeast Enhancement, the NESE, which is gonna supply natural gas to Long Island and New York City. 3 major developments in New York City: the LaGuardia Airport, the Brooklyn Navy Yard, which I think they had 30 different projects, development projects being there, and also for Belmont Park, where they want to build a new stadium for the Islanders. They've stopped this projects from going through, so they put a moratorium on gas, new gas, and more gas. Now the governor came out and is basically threatening them, saying they're going to pull their license. Now it's forcing them to provide gas, even when the PSC admits that there's definitely problems as far as providing supply. I mean, you remember the polar vortex we had, I think it was in 2013, 2014, when there was a big price in that spike in natural gas and propane. It wasn't for a lack of supply. We had plenty of supply. The problem was because the constraints of getting it there from point A to point B. So the infrastructure wasn't in place. You need these pipelines, these interstate pipelines, to get the gas to where they need to be, because it affects the whole marketplace. And if you can't get the gas, whether it's Northeast or wherever, you're not gonna have gas. It's a problem.
The blocking of pipelines and the utilities saying, we're not gonna allow new customers to hook in, because there's gonna be more demand than we can feed. Well, the governor just came out, as Phil said, and said, you're gonna hook up those customers, those thousands of customers, you're gonna hook them up. Yeah, well, to the same pipes, but only so much gas can flow through it, only so much pressure is there. You know what happens to your gas appliances when the pressure goes down? They shut down. They shut down. And then you'll have far more people without heat. We're still around 90% of homes and businesses and buildings that heat themselves with some fossil fuel form or another.
You know, one thing a lot of people upstate don't realize is that in Manhattan primarily, most of the high-rise buildings are heated by Con Edison. They're heated by the residual steam that's pumped throughout the city. So if Con Edison isn't generating electricity, guess what? It's gonna be millions of frozen people, because that's how these buildings get their heat.
Well, the other thing is they've been converting thousands. They've been converting thousands. There's a lot of people who are heated with like these oil boilers, dirtier fuel, and they've been converting them over to natural gas. Now they're going to stop those conversions, so that's not going to happen. So what are they going to do? They're going to have the dirtier fuel being burned, which is worse for the environment. That's going to have to continue to be done to provide the heat that these people need. So it goes against their whole mantra about trying to have a cleaner environment. Well, I guess it doesn't matter when they want to try to stop natural gas. I mean, it just really doesn't make a lot of sense. Because at least these oil boilers are going to be not going to be converted. It's going to continue to burn dirtier fuel, which is worse for the environment, and that's not going to get us to where they want to get to.
It's not gonna matter, 9 years is all we got about that.
That's right.
But they also wanna shut down.
Well, it's because of you dairy farmers
Natural
with your
gas.
cow
They
flatulence.
can't get the natural gas. We got one more polar vortex. We were only like 1 or 2 power plants away from blackouts. On the left, one of those plants goes down.
They got rolling blackouts going on right now in California.
Oh, really?
Oh, big,
Well, by 2040, all of generation is supposed to be carbon free, so no natural gas, no oil, no, I mean, it's just, what are you gonna do? I mean, I don't understand it. I mean, I support wind and solar, that should be part of our energy portfolio. When I talk about this energy issue, I always talk about it like, you know, your 401k, do you invest it all in stocks, bonds, or cash? No, you diversify it. Same thing with your energy portfolio. You need wind, you need solar, you need nuclear, you need natural gas for sure. You need to balance it. That's gonna make your a stable, a more reliable system. And I also talk about this as like a 3-legged stool, our energy policy. Clean, yes, and this climate bill we passed was certainly, did a lot on clean, but it didn't do anything on the other two. Affordable and reliable. You need a reliable energy supply. Wind and solar is great, but if the sun's not shining, the wind's not blowing, you're not getting any energy.
What
So-
percentage are we getting from that? From wind and solar?
Wind and
It's
solar.
less than 1%, isn't it?
No, it's closer to 12%, I think.
Is it really?
Yeah.
But you still need,
Power
you
is
still,
6% of the United States.
Yeah.
and you still need the
and-
conventional
and-
means to back it up.
And we
Unless
have a
you
lot
go
of hydro
forward.
power, which
Yeah,
is
hydro.
wind power too, so that's 20+%.
Secondary to that.
This gentleman here has a question.
Secondary to that goes back to the infrastructure in your state. Like what kind of case studies have been made to see for these infrastructure upgrades, like pipelines, the NIPO as a whole, or NISO electric for the Northeast. Goes back to how are you gonna understand the macro and microeconomics of like each region, say 1, 2, and 3, or Sonoma County. Goes, like what study has been started or formally published for this initiative as a whole? Has that been formalized at this point?
One of the biggest problems of getting clean energy down is the cities, is a bottleneck.
And not just clean energy, just as a
Yeah.
whole. Yeah.
You mean in this divide New York
Correct.
scenario?
Yes.
I don't think that's been fully fleshed out yet. I mean, there's a,
We would maintain Niagara Falls, of course, which most of that energy goes out of state, oddly enough.
Right.
And we pay
Similar to
more
Maine.
than what they ship it out of state for. So there's a lot of things that we can change when we get rid of Manhattan. Now we can say, all right, that energy comes to us at a fraction of the cost, and then the surplus can go downstate or to another state if they wanna pay more. But then we can set the precedent for the price and not send it out of state, and then we ship in from either Canada or like Buffalo in certain areas where they're paying almost 4 or 5 cents more a kilowatt than they're shipping it out of the same city for.
Right.
It's outrageous.
And where I live particularly, solar or wind are not an option. I've had studies on my property. It's not an option. The solar particularly because we don't have three-phase. You gotta have three-phase to put in any significant solar operation. I'm way too out in the sticks. And we don't have, I did the wind, I was serious about the wind thing. I was thinking that would be really cool to annoy what few neighbors I have with that big whoop, whoop, whoop. But there's just not, you know, you need a consistent average and we just don't have it. I know you got a huge wind farm over here towards, yeah. But,
Yeah, so really for that solar and wind to be really effective, you really have to deploy storage, and we're nowhere near the capacity to deploy the type of storage you need. The other thing that kind of boggles my mind about this war on natural gas is that even the NISO, which is basically tasked with making sure the energy is getting to where it needs to be, and they kind of deal with the wholesale markets, in their own report said, if you're concerned about carbon, CO2 emissions in ours, carbon emissions have gone down the last 15, 20 years because of natural gas. Because we're converting over from a dirtier coal to natural gas. That's why carbon emissions are going down, but they don't want to acknowledge that. They just want to just keep going and don't even want to look at that as an option, which doesn't make any sense.
Somebody should tell them without carbon, we wouldn't have trees.
I like carbon. Does anybody else have anything?
How do we fight the news media so we can get the correct news out to people so that they realize what's really going on?
Stop supporting them.
It's horrendous. That's Donald Trump's every moment
Right.
of what he does. I mean, I don't know how he can keep his head up. I mean, it's just brutal. It's brutal. And it's so frustrating that you can't get a straight shot on news, really from anywhere.
Well, thank God for the internet, because that's about the only way that certain people put it out, you know.
Do you have a certain pamphlet or something that we could put on so we could email all of our friends to explain this to them?
Or you can have a link.
Or a link?
What Divide New York
Oh,
is.
yeah, there's
New Amsterdam.
paperwork out on the front desk that has our web addresses on it. There's 2 sheets, 2 separate sheets. I printed 50 off of each, so there should be enough. And then there's, like I said, some of my cards out there if anybody wants to call me directly about any of these issues.
Because even if we write letters to the,
Organization or groups right now.
He's in the leadership, Brian
Okay.
is.
It's tens of thousands. As I couldn't give you an exact number, but tens of
It is
thousands.
several tens of thousands of people are involved and have signed on. And I think our Facebook page has something like 80,000 or something followers. Now granted, some of those people are followers because they're, you know, stalkers.
Yeah.
But, you know, who cares, you know? My life's an open book. My Facebook page has no security settings. I don't care. The worst thing you're gonna get off of my Facebook page is my daily Bible quote. You know, so teach me a lesson, use that against me. Anybody else have anything? Doug?
I'm good. Is everybody all questioned out?
I encourage you to take the sheets of paper from there, check out our website. If you have any questions, we have the links to the address of the Facebook and everything else are on there. If anybody wants to call me directly, I didn't give you my cell number, I'm not insane, but you do, my home number is on there. Thank you all for your time and attention, sincerely.
Thank you.